Howdy, my name is Faith Martin. I am a first-year master's student at Texas A&M University, studying in the Agriculture, Leadership, Education, and Communications Department, commonly known as ALEC. As a part of the ALEC 640 class under Dr. Robert Strong, we will be looking at the concept of pro-innovation bias. So, after following along with this video, you will be able to understand what pro-innovation bias is and be able to define it in your own words. Recognize causes of pro-innovation bias within literature. And lastly, apply the concept of pro-innovation bias to case study examples. In order for you to have a game plan, or this is our sequence of events, here's our outline. First, we had our objectives that we already went over. Next, we will go over pro-innovation bias definitions, or pro-innovation bias defined, the causes of pro-innovation bias, some case studies, and then a summary of what we learned. There's a handout link below in the description that can be used as a reference during this video as well. Feel free to pause and/or speed up this video to get the best experience. So for clarity purposes, in order to give us a basis of understanding, Everett M. Rogers defines innovation as an idea, practice, or object perceived as new by an individual or other unit of adoption in his book, Diffusion of Innovations, in 2003. The key word in this definition is new. An innovation could be new to me, but you are already aware of it. However, the idea is still perceived as new, so it is an innovation in my eyes. Understand? It's kind of like a new car might be pre-owned, but it's still new to its next owner, so they still say it's a new car. Diffusion, in this context, is essentially how the innovation spreads, whether it be by word of mouth, mass media, one-on-one contact, group workshops, whatever it may be. The innovation, aka new idea, spreads. It gets out. Okay, moving on. Pro-innovation bias defined. Everett M. Rogers is the father of innovation, and as thus, the concept of pro-innovation bias. In his book, Diffusion of Innovations, in 2003, Chapter 3, Contributions and Criticisms of Diffusion Research, on page 106, he states that pro-innovation bias is the implication in diffusion research that an innovation should be diffused and adopted by all members of a social system, that it should be diffused more rapidly, and that the innovation should neither be reinvented nor rejected. There are other definitions that we could look at as well from peer-reviewed sources and non, both of which credit Rogers to their defining of the term. Jason Riera says that pro-innovation bias refers to the tendency to have an excessive optimism towards the value, utility, or success of an innovation or new technology, often ignoring or downplaying its potential disadvantages, risks, or failures. This bias can affect various stakeholders, including innovators, consumers, investors, and policymakers, who are now involved in the process of innovation diffusion. This is a behavioral economics perspective, whereas Phoebe, Grippenberg, and Segerkrantz state that innovation research seems to be built upon a dominant assumption that innovation is good, regardless of the consequences, in their writing of Challenging the Innovation Paradigm, 2012. We have heard what Rogers, an innovation expert, says. What a person interested in behavioral economics as a behavioral scientist states, and how scientists who challenge the diffusion paradigm see pro-innovation bias. In my mind, pro-innovation bias is essentially the thought that the newest thing is the best thing, regardless of what the best thing for the situation might be. For example, many people see the newest fashion trends, technology, or bad behavior, think smoking cigarettes that has now turned into vaping, and buy into it without really thinking into what they've invested their time, money, or effort in. Marketing is really good at getting people to do this, but methods on how they latch on to consumers to do this is for another time. So let's think for a moment. What do you say pro-innovation bias is? If you're following along with the handout, please feel free to edit the definition stated previously or make your own as we go along. Causes of pro-innovation bias in diffusion research. So, what actually causes this pro-innovation bias? Where do scientists get the idea to implement these ideas regardless of the negative consequences as we likely see in hindsight? Most funding for diffusion research is done through some change agency, whether it be a college at a university, a company, or whatever shape a sponsor can take form. They automatically have pro-innovation bias because they want this innovation to be implemented. Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting money towards it. Make sense? They also are in consultation with the people that work on this innovation, so they may have some sort of sway, per se. For example, say I was an investor looking to fund a research project relating to a new type of livestock feed that had a specialized new ingredient, making it safe for all ruminant livestock. Examples would be cattle, sheep, goats. As an investor, I would be regularly checking in with the research scientists to make sure my money was invested in a product that will be proven successful. Through regular check-ins, research scientists that are working with livestock raisers may boast about new findings and downplay negative ones. They would be doing this to prove that research should continue. My money was not wasted and success was on the way. Thus, the pro-innovation bias is strengthened because the focus is on the positive attributes of a new feed ingredient and its benefits, despite the negative ones it might have. Visible tracing of successful and unsuccessful diffusion efforts is interesting due to its place in that outside of the box category. Successful diffusion efforts leaves a rate of adoption that we can measure and explore more thoroughly, whereas unsuccessful diffusion efforts, like something didn't catch on, it was rejected, opinion leaders said no to it, funding was lost, essentially discontinuance happens, do not leave data that can be reconstructed for us to look at why the innovation would or wouldn't have been successful. In other words, this muddled up the idea of diffusion, so most researchers look at diffusion research that was successful rather than unsuccessful. And of course, hindsight is always 20/20. Now that we know the why behind pro-innovation bias, let's look at a real-world example. The case study that we're going to go after today is going to be the Pure Drinking Water in Egyptian Villages study that was done by David Velasco. In this case study by Velasco, it is set in the Nile River Delta, where what we would think of as good drinking water is hard to find. The water is in abundance as it flows in the canals that go through the land. However, sanitation is almost non-existent as villagers use the same water to wash their clothes as they do to drink. Due to these practices of water use, illness is a serious issue. along with a host of other health consequences. In an effort to help the people of this area, the Government Ministry of Health, which was funded by the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, constructed a system of pumps and pipes that deliver pure, chlorinated water to public spigots for people to use. Seems like a great help to these people, right? What could go wrong? Unfortunately, this caused a whole new set of issues. Villagers left the spigots open and running, which caused large mud holes to form around the water spigots. Fights broke out because suddenly they had to take turns, as was not customary to their traditions of water gathering. The social tradition of women gathering together to wash things was impossible with the innovation, causing rejection of it, and most villagers kept their water in a zur, which is kind of like an open vat, so the water became unhealthy with all the different dirt and dust particles that got into it, regardless of where it was procured. In other words, the diffusion of the innovation flopped due to the innovators' lack of educating their respondents, as well as a lack of research or knowledge on behavioral and cultural norms. I've broken it down on this slide for you to see and be able to understand a little bit better. Take a moment to look at this. So, to sum up this crash course on the pro-innovation bias in diffusion research. Pro-innovation bias within diffusion research is essentially the belief that an innovation holds no fault and should be diffused rapidly, regardless of the consequences it may have. There are multiple causes of pro-innovation bias, but the two main ones we see a lot of are funding related. Change agencies are pushing for an innovation to move forward, so they automatically have bias. And the issue of visible tracing of both successful and unsuccessful innovation research projects. These are just a few examples, but pro-innovation bias can take many forms. In the case study based in the villages of the Nile River Delta, the pro-innovation bias of the researcher was due to a lack of knowledge on cultural and ethnic norms. Had he known what their normal day-to-day looked like, he may have been able to better suit their needs and cause a successful and sustainable change. These are the references I used within this video and my research on the topic. Thank you for listening and hopefully learning a little more about the pro-innovation bias within diffusion research. Again, my name is Faith Martin. I am studying within the ALEC department of Texas A&M University as a non-thesis master's student. And if you should ever need to reach out, my email is listed there on the screen. And now you can see the face behind the voice. I highly recommend you stick around for the last two slides if you would like to test your knowledge on the subject with a few short quiz questions. But all in all, gig 'em, God bless, and good luck with all of your educational endeavors. So now, let's test your knowledge. Question 1. What is the key word in Rogers' definition that sets innovation apart from other research ideas and technologies? Is it A, adoption, B, perceived, or C, new? Number 2. What is not one of the causes of pro-innovation bias? A, early adopters versus laggards debate, B, change agencies and funding, or C, traceable records of successful and unsuccessful diffusion efforts? It may help if you have a sticky note nearby to write down your answers. Number 3. What is a unique, refining idea of all definitions of pro-innovation bias discussed in the video? Is it A, the newest, best thing on the market is always on a time constraint, so acting fast is more beneficial to the world of research? B, the newest idea or technology is the best one, regardless of negative side effects? Or C, the newest way of doing things has its disadvantages, so adoption has its fastest rate when both positive and negative choices are weighed by all members involved? Number 4. In the case study given on slide 8, what would be an example of a pro-innovation bias due to unsuccessful results? Research a journal article while paused or after the video has been completed to further your understanding. I would recommend going back and doing this later, but it's a good exercise. And finally, number 5. In the following example, identify what the innovation and the pro-innovation bias, or biases, would be. A small farming operation grows varying grain varieties for local feed mills where most of their product goes to the surrounding county's livestock operations. A research scientist approaches a farmer to try a new seed variety of oats that is marketed to be more easily digestible and higher in nutrient content for livestock species than other grain varieties currently on the market. The farmer tests out this new seed variety during the next year's crop on 25% of his available land. Throughout the growing season, the research scientist checks in regularly, takes samples of the new variety, and reports back to the university where he is employed. At the end of the study, the new oats variety is deemed successful and that it does have a higher nutrition content and is fast growing, making the feed mills that receive it pay a premium for the grain. However, the small farmer had a decrease in overall crop yield due to pest and disease resistance related loss because his current IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, plan does not fit the insects that are attracted to this new variety. After telling his friends in the local community about the experience, very few farmers in the area are open to trying the new oats variety. The research scientist deems this area to be an outlier and moves on to the next geographical area to gain respondents. Something to think about. Correct answers will be in the description of this video. Thank you for following along, and I hope you learn more about pro-innovation bias in diffusion research.